So thank you so much for having me. To give you just a brief background of myself so you know the perspectives I'm speaking from, for the past 7 years I worked as a curator at the museum at FIT, and on the screen you see an installation image from one of my last exhibitions titled Black Fashion Designers. So here you can see a number of designers who are referencing African cultures, but doing so in a very respectful way, looking at kente cloth, wax prints, the tradition of scarification as well. I recently just shifted over and am now the industry coordinator for a new MFA program in fashion design at FIT, and I also started a master's in fashion law at Fordham under the direction of Professor Susan Scafidi. So why is cultural appropriation such a hot button topic within the past 5 years within the fashion presses? The United Nations has taken interest in trying to protect indigenous languages and designs, especially during the World Intellectual Property Organization. New York fashion scholar Kim Jenkins has noted that there's a history of pulling from other cultures as a resource for design inspiration, but not actually wanting to build an intimate relationship with these people who are the source of the inspiration, not really wanting to count them as equals. So I ask you, when you look at these images here, are you starting to see some of the issues with cultural appropriation? If you can't, that's okay. I'm going to guide you through some of the nuances. But I also want to look at the differences of during the 60s and 70s, even going all the way back to the 1900s, there were a number of designers referencing different cultures, but why today is it called cultural appropriation as opposed to back then? So we have to look at a few things. One of them is, how has our world changed? One of the things that we really have to look at is the internet and how it's really changed how designers research and how people are gathering their information, but also how has the fashion design process changed? Journalist Bridget Foley has said, what was once perceived as inspired creation has become cultural appropriation. And if we look at how designers are inspired, while they used to take trips to different countries and sometimes for a few months and really get to know some of these cultures, today most of the research is done via the internet, where they don't really have a close connection to a lot of these cultures. They're simply maybe pulling an image off of Pinterest or Googling it, and it doesn't really have that metadata to connect it to who it's from. So they don't necessarily feel as guilty or not even know when they're actually appropriating. So I want to show you this video right here. Oh, before doing that, a few different examples of the definitions of cultural appropriation. Here, the one from the Cambridge Dictionary. And here is more how the public defines it. They say appropriation occurs when a style leads to racist generalizations or stereotypes where it originated, but is deemed as high fashion, cool, or funny when the privileged takes it for themselves. So I want to show you this video from Teen Vogue because it starts to address the issues regarding hair. And I think that that's one subject where most people say, ugh, get over it. Why are you being so sensitive? And I think this video explains the importance of it. So if you can please play that.
I am Native American.
I'm African American.
I am Puerto Rican and Black.
I'm Indian.
I am Jamaican and Haitian.
I'm Japanese.
I am Black, Chinese, Irish, and Greek Indian.
And this
is my
culture.
I think there are a lot of stereotypes.
Everyone just looked at me like I was some type of human zoo thing. Oh my gosh, who is she? Like, is she some type of witch doctor or something? She's wearing like this dark lipstick.
Oh, so do you wear footwear back home?
People ask me, how do I wash my hair? And I just look like, come on, the same way you wash your hair.
I wish the world knew that we do still exist. I wish the world knew that not all Native Americans lived in teepees. We don't still live in teepees.
You have something in your hair. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, yeah, someone put like a piece of paper in your afro.
People were telling me how much weave and hair extensions and braids and stuff like that was kind of hood or ghetto.
Baby hairs were called ghetto or ratchet. I bumped into this blonde-haired girl and she had her baby hair, and it was just so cool that everyone's embracing the culture now.
Japanese culture is actually so creative. This is why we have so many different original makeup style, including this.
When I see people wearing Native American accessories and they don't know the meaning of it, I feel disrespected.
We have to understand that it's not an accessory, you know? It's not something that we put on our arms and walk around because it's just beautiful. It is literally us.
It doesn't just fall off an eagle and, oh, here, it's yours, I found it. You have to earn it.
It shows what a beautiful country and culture you come from.
I see it as a way to attach myself back to my roots.
Being comfortable in your skin and not caring about what other people say.
Being Afro-Latina, you have a lot of hair. So when I was growing up, I was always embarrassed of my sideburns, my mustache, my eyebrows.
I found it very difficult to be myself because I was comparing myself to others who had straight hair.
Straightening my hair and putting all these chemicals in it, so I decided to go natural.
Because I want to be different. I don't want to be like anybody else.
Embracing my heritage was embracing all the hair on my body, from the hair on my head to the hair on my toes.
I feel more connected to my ethnicity with this feather.
And I feel really proud because I represent my home, my culture.
And now it's my identity and my culture.
I wouldn't change that about myself, and I hope anyone else wouldn't change that about themselves, even if they don't have an afro, whatever grows out of their scalps or whatever skin color they are, just be beautiful whoever you are.
And I think that's something that all young girls should do, embrace their beauty.
So you might want to know, where does the law come in? Why is it important to protect cultures? How to legally protect cultural products? And something that Professor Scafidi brought up in her book, Who Owns Culture, is where is the balance between Creative Commons and protecting these cultures? So to use a systematic way of looking at some of these case studies, I use Professor Scafidi's method of the 3 S's. First, the source. Who is a designer referencing? Significance, is it something sacred or does it have a special meaning? And similarity, is it a carbon copy or is there actually some creativity that goes into the design? So first we look at Gucci's Resort 2018 collection, and this kind of caught a huge firestorm on social media because Diane Dixon, the famous track Olympian, had posted an Instagram post, and in the comment section she said, "Give credit to @DapperDan Harlem. He did it first in 1989." So here you can see all the various headlines that came out, and what I thought was quite interesting is it wasn't just on social media, but the New York Times picked up on it, the Business of Fashion, and many other news outlets. So looking at the 3 S's, we have it was influenced, is hip-hop influenced fashion design, but the significance is that Dapper Dan was refused service from various luxury brands, so he began designing his own unique garments, customized for his clientele's personalities using knockoff luxury brand logos that he had created. As a result, he was sued for trademark infringement, and ironically, almost 30 years later, Gucci then created a jacket that, if we look at the similarity, pretty much almost a carbon copy, with the exception that instead of using Louis Vuitton, it was a Gucci fabric. Luckily, though, Gucci had corrected their mistake, and they showed Dapper Dan's contribution to fashion history. Here you can see that he is featured in their new tailoring campaign, and they also went even further to collaborate with him and use his imagination and his tailoring skills to create a limited edition collection that's going to be coming out pretty soon. So with this, I was quite impressed because it went beyond just simply giving somebody cash settlement, but actually involving them in the collaborative process. And there was recently an article written by Nick Grant titled, "Is Fashion Relying Too Much on Hip Hop to Stay Relevant?" which I thought was quite important. And he said that this strikes a balance between luxury and cultures. So earlier this summer, Kendall and Kylie Jenner, sisters of the Kardashians, had come out with a t-shirt line, and what they did was they put their faces on hip-hop legends Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. Here you can see Biggie's mom with her reaction to it, and she actually points out some of the legal issues. So first we have that they did not ask for permission from the estate. Second, we have that they used a potentially copyrighted image and then placed their image over it. And lastly, as you can see here that they pointed out, is that they're using someone's likeness to sell and to make a profit off of something, not giving anything back to the estate. So we have to look at internet and social media and how that's created many voices, but it's also allowed people to call out cultural appropriation in a much faster way, as opposed to waiting from a journalist from a very respected newspaper to write a nice article about it. But we also have to look at how this culture is. Most people will simply retweet, create a huge hysteria, and then after move on quite quickly, often without even reading the article to know what is it even addressing. So we have to ask ourselves did they actually learn their lesson? In this case, they did not, because they did another collection where they used Ozzy Osbourne's image and got called out by Sharon Osbourne on social media. So then we come to this example. Here we have Chanel's Fall 1991 collection created by Karl Lagerfeld. And with this, Karl Lagerfeld was pulling from Chanel's tradition of layering gold jewelry, but in order to modernize the brand, that he was referencing hip-hop accessories like the Dookie chains here seen on DJ Eric B. and rapper Rakim. What's even more offensive, though, is that if you actually look at the cuffs on the model connected to a gold chain, that it actually brings up, I believe unintentionally, evocative images of the mass incarceration of black men, but also could even point to slavery. And what's important is that in 1991, hip-hop was not an accepted music form as it is today, that fashion was pulling from a culture that was struggling to gain recognition, which pretty much further exploited them. Nick Grant had said also in this article that hip-hop is often correlated with coolness and trendiness, but what many people don't realize is that it truly symbolizes a culture whose odds are constantly against them. The fashion industry has played a role in the stereotyping of hip-hop, deeming it too ghetto for inclusion. What's also different with this and why it didn't create a big uproar during 1991 is that fashion shows during that time weren't really attended by the mass public. There were more fashion industry insiders attending them. Also, most of the fashion shows were not online and streamed as they are today. If you can think that in 1991, AOL was just introduced, so that around the same time as this collection. And by viewing this example through a 2017 perspective, we have a 2017 lens, we have a greater perspective of the impact of the injustice that occurs when stealing from a community. We then move on to Marc Jacobs' Spring 27 runway show, which once again created a huge uproar. Marc Jacobs said that it was inspired by the rave movement of the 90s, Boy George and his friend Lana Wachowski, who's the director of the film The Matrix. The problem is that most of the dreadlocks were featured on a predominantly white cast, and you can see the fallout from it right here. And Marc Jacobs actually apologized, and he said that he was being insensitive, but I ask you though, is apologizing enough? And if it's not, who's to hold them accountable? So when looking at it, if you're not familiar, dreadlocks do come from the Rastafarian religion and culture. And as Professor Scafidi notes in her book, that outsiders are attracted by particular art forms are seldom content to limit themselves to recognition and appreciation of the source community. They transform cultural products to suit their own taste, express their own creative individuality, or simply make a profit. So if we look at the three S's here, it comes from Rastafarianism. The significance is it's a symbol of power and pride to stand up against those oppressing the black diaspora. The term dreadlocks does actually come from the Rastafarian culture, and the similarity between the two, it was quite similar except for he used felt and neon colors as opposed to the actual color of hair. So around the same time that Marc Jacobs was showing his collection, the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit brought its decision banning dreadlocks during the hiring process. They had cited the word race in the Civil Rights Act, which covers only immutable factors, such as the texture of black hair, because that cannot change, but the hairstyle, it did not, because one can change their hairstyle. So designers must be aware of the sensitivities and what is currently going on in society and culture. And what shocked me even more is that Vogue had picked up on this and wrote about an article, but somehow Marc Jacobs did not pick up on it at all, or his design team. And he had said a quote, which I think explains it. He said, "I operate so inside my little fashion bubble." So here we have, similar to Marc Jacobs, another fallout with Valentino brand for their Spring 2016 collection for similarity. With this one, it was the cornrow hairstyle that was worn on, once again, the predominantly white cast of models. It was furthermore exploited when they showed the lack of diversity, when only 8 out of the 87 looks were actually shown on black models in a collection that was supposed to be inspired by Africa. Nick Grant points out, "This injustice goes to show that there definitely weren't enough people around the decision-making process who could confidently call this out as a very bad idea." Furthermore, the kind of negligence reduces centuries-old look to just another trend when it is so much deeper than that. It's downright insulting when far too many black folks are taunted, labeled as ghetto, and discriminated against in the workplace for sporting the exact same hairstyle. So looking at their ad campaign, what was interesting is that they actually didn't hire a fashion photographer, but a National Geographic photographer when they went to Kenya to visit the Maasai people. And you can see that they actually included some of the Maasai people in their ad campaign and also showed the process of how they were collaborating, but that wasn't enough, that most people said that there wasn't enough black models in it, and also that they're simply just using Kenya as a backdrop. So then we go a little bit further to John Galliano's first collection for Dior, which was spring 1997. And Galliano was also referencing the Maasai people. And here you can see the similarities. You have the necklaces, the beaded necklaces, the hat, and also the shoes that he had created. But he also was referencing the Dinka tribe. And so with this, it's the beautiful corsets that the men and the women wear in South Sudan. And you can see here how he has created it. So in looking at the 3 S's here with the Maasai tribe, it's important to note that each string of the beads and the color represent an important part of their culture, and that the similarity is extremely close, that you almost can't tell the difference. And if you look at the Dinka tribe, that the beaded corset symbolizes age, wealth, marital status, and it's one of their most prized possessions. If you look at the similarity, once again, very close, except for there's an evening dress under Galliano's version. But some of the considerations is, where was the beadwork done? It was probably done in a French atelier. Was anybody from the tribe consulted? Probably not. And simply that they're simplifying two different, very different African cultures and relating them in the beadwork. So we then go to Yves Saint Laurent for his spring 1967 collection. And with this one, he was once again inspired by Africa, and it's constantly called the African Collection. On the Harper's Bazaar had described it as a fantasy of primitive genius, and I think we can all see how that's quite offensive. In 1967, the entire collection was shown on white models, even though he was a huge proponent and champion black models. But you can see when they did hit the retrospective in 2002, right before he had retired, they actually made the decision to show it on all black models. So someone in the company must have caught on to what was occurring within society and had advised him to do so. So throughout my research, I was really trying to identify who is he referencing. If we look at Africa, it is a continent, not a country. It is comprised of 50 different countries with over 1,500 languages and dialects. And it was actually really difficult to figure out who he was referencing. Here you have two possibilities. And if you look at the masquerade is actually quite important because it represents ancestral spirits and giving guidance to those living. So something probably a bit more sacred. The hairstyles are a little bit easier to track down, but with this, once again, kind of simplifying things, and in the 5 exhibitions that have occurred in the US on the retrospectives, no one has really bothered to look at what cultures is he referencing. They simply just still call it the African collection. So here we've gone through kind of some of the significance of it, and he has added in some of the creativity. We then move on to the last case study with the Métis artist, Christie Belcourt. She did a very thoughtful, beautiful collaboration with Valentino for Resort 2016. And here they had said that it was a very respectful collaboration, everything was done properly. And if we look at the significance of this, first of all, she was referencing her water song painting, and even though it was her own work of art, she still had asked the elders in the nation because it represented the traditions of her people, and it just didn't belong to her. But in the same time, the Valentino men's collection, you can see here that they have completely appropriated it, really perpetuating stereotypes. What you see in those yellow boxes are little prints of different Indians carrying around bows and arrows or running with rifles or running with headdresses. And many people from the different nations said, as you heard in the video earlier, is that we still don't live in teepees. We're not running around with rifles and things like that. And also you can see from the ancient moccasins that they're literally carbon copying a lot of those, and those are very, very specific prints and beadworks or quill work. So in 2011, there was the Urban Outfitters who had created a series of pieces based off of the Navajo Nation, and what they were copying were actual trademark prints and also using the trademark name. Urban Outfitters had pretty much said that it was a common name and that many other fashion designers could do it, so they could as well. And Dr. Jessica Metcalf had said, yes, you can be inspired, but inspiration requires some creativity and skill of its own. You would never copy a design from Prada, but Urban Outfitters thought nothing of using the word Navajo to promote their hipster panties. And of course, this did result in a case from the Navajo Nation filed in the U.S. District Court of New Mexico for using their trademark print and name, but also violating the Indian Arts and Crafts Act. And this act, which was started in the 1930s, actually meant to protect more of the people purchasing art to make sure they weren't purchasing fake art than the makers. So looking at this, we have seen kind of the importance of it, but to emphasize the idea that the Navajo Nation is a dry reservation. So when they printed that image on the flask, highly offensive, and also the idea of modesty, and then all of a sudden putting their print on a hipster panty also is quite offensive. So the last few slides here we have from 1970, we have Giorgio di Sant'Angelo, and here he is referencing many different nations. You can see he's emulating the ribbon dresses from the Cherokee Nation, the Northern Plains hair with the eagle feather that we had heard about earlier, and also the mukluk boots that are waterproof and worn in the Arctic made of moose skin. And then also to point out what I'm going to talk about in a sec is the idea of the warrior makeup that is, of course, worn in very sacred moments, and they've pretty much completely appropriated it. Here you'll see that he's actually put it, Giorgio di Sant'Angelo himself has painted all the makeup on the faces, and what's even more offensive is if you look at the skin tone of the actual models, they've actually made the white models look a bit tanner and darker by simply creating and putting more bronzer on them. So Dr. Metcalf has said, we're being told that we don't have rights over how we're represented in mainstream America. We are told that we should get over it, but the people who are saying this don't even know what the issues are. When people know us only as a costume or something you dress up as for Halloween or for a music video, then you stop thinking about us as people, and this is incredibly dangerous. So if we look at this, the warrior face paint symbolizes a heroic act during war, and I don't think that those models had done any heroic acts during a war. So in conclusion, how do we get this right in the future? You can collaborate with a cultural institution. You can consult somebody who is well-versed in fashion law. And the reason why I emphasize fashion law is there are a lot of lawyers out there, but they don't know exactly how designers work. So it's very difficult to do that. Also consider the 3 S's. I think it's pretty simple, and Professor Scafidi has done a wonderful job for people who are buying, collaborating, or advising. And to show the process, as we've seen, photos don't do enough. You really have to show that there's a mutual respect, and I would suggest doing it through video. And buy directly from the artisans. Dr. Metcalf has a wonderful website, Beyond Buckskin, where she has a very comprehensive list of different Native artists that you can buy from. And I urge designers and their teams to use these tools, not only to avoid a PR nightmare, but also to be more proactive than reactive. Designers must do their homework because cultural ignorance is no longer an excuse. Thank you.